Hi, I'm Utah Governor Spencer Cox. Thank you for your work to help every child achieve grade level reading skills. Your work is crucial to the success of our children and our nation. As you know, CGLR was launched in 2010 with strong bipartisan support by those who recognize the need to focus on getting things done for children and youth instead of partisan fighting. The focus on solutions is very much the intent behind an initiative I've been working on this past year as chair of the National Governors Association, called Disagree Better. Disagree Better aims to help people work through their differences without all the hate. Over this past year, Republicans and Democrats from across the country have embraced the Disagree Better initiative, engaging in interventions that social scientists say reduce polarization. These include taping videos with a political opponent to show how we can disagree with respect, hosting debates on college campuses, and joining across party lines in hands-on service projects. CGLR's network of 350 plus community coalitions across 46 states includes leaders from both parties, showing your commitment to finding areas of shared concern. Thank you for recognizing Promise Partnership Utah with the CGLR Pacesetter Award last year for their efforts to improve early literacy outcomes, increase third grade reading scores, and expand access to all-day kindergarten. I appreciate the importance you place on finding areas of common ground to advance children's early school success. It's not just the work you do, but also the way you do it that is making a difference.
I'm Maryland's Governor, Wes Moore. We must prioritize these comprehensive, all hands-on-deck approaches as we are doing here in Maryland with a blueprint for Maryland's future. The blueprint is laser-focused legislation to transform the state's pre-K through post-secondary systems with extensive policy changes and unprecedented investments in our state's public education system. The challenges are great, but seeing our children's eyes light up when they're able to read a book, or when adults are able to read a job application on the back of something as simple as a cereal box, those rewards are greater than any challenge. Achieving reading proficiency is going to take a special kind of commitment from us. Literacy is the best path to ensure that we leave no one behind.
And I think we are all well aware at this stage that in response to the unprecedented disruptions to school learning caused by the pandemic, federal leaders established the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER as it's known, investing $190 billion in K-12 education, with state education agencies given the leverage to reserve up to 10% of that sum to support relief efforts. In the middle of this process, back at the end of 2022, GLR actually hosted a webinar that focused on following the money, where we learned from the Council of Chief State School Officers how states were investing or planning to invest their set aside, with a big focus on tutoring and accelerated learning, which is what's over $4 billion, out of school time and extended learning, about $3 billion, and this is across the country. School personnel, $1.5 billion, curriculum and instruction, $1.4 billion, and digital connectivity and remote learning, $1.2 billion. So these were the amounts kind of summed up across the state. All of these strategies have been proven effective, but another thing we are all well aware of is that the funding supporting these efforts is ending very soon. There's a September 30th, 2024 deadline, that's in a couple days, for obligating the final pool of relief funds, and a January 28th, 2025 deadline to liquidate the grant before funds must be returned to the U.S. Department of Education. And then while states can request a 14-month liquidation extension from the U.S. Department of Education in specific circumstances, the end of ESSER continues to be at the forefront, driving states to identify opportunities for sustaining and scaling the solutions that have been initiated as they revise budgets and rework funding strategies to find ways to continue to support the solutions. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading is absolutely thrilled to have this unique opportunity today to hear straight from the decision and policymakers who are leading state departments of education about how they invested the funds over the past 4 years, what they learned, and what they are doing now to plan to ensure that students across their states will continue to have access to the extra supports that they have come to rely on for ongoing learning growth. The rarity of this opportunity to convene and learn from a panel of state chief school officers is no small thing, and we are extremely grateful for the time and insights these leaders will share with us today. There have been endless articles and reports about what has worked and what states and districts need to do now, but we now have the opportunity today to hear directly from the source, and this is just extremely valuable to our GLR network and all of you who are here with us today. And even more valuable is the moderator that will be facilitating this important conversation. We are very lucky to welcome back Dr. William R. Hite, who is the president and CEO of KnowledgeWorks, who will expertly draw out the key learnings and insights from this group. Prior to joining KnowledgeWorks, Dr. Hite served as superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia, the largest public school system in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Under his leadership, the district expanded innovative school models, redesigning schools in partnership with communities. And now I'm honored to welcome and briefly introduce our esteemed panelists with us today in alphabetical order. And please note that full bios are linked in the chat, so I am just previewing quickly who we have with us today. Susana Cordova is Commissioner of Education at the Colorado Department of Education. She is Colorado's 18th Education Commissioner and the first Latina to hold the state's top education position. Prior to being named Commissioner, Cordova spent more than 30 years in education. She served as an assistant principal, chief academic officer, chief schools officer, and deputy superintendent before becoming the superintendent of Denver Public Schools and before becoming the state commissioner. Katie Jenner is Secretary of Education with the Indiana Department of Education. As the state's first Secretary of Education, Dr. Katie Jenner leads the department and chairs the State Board of Education with a learner-centered, future-focused vision. Under Dr. Jenner's leadership, Indiana is focused on three key pillars: student learning and opportunity, educator talent, quality and value, and system alignment and capacity. Indiana has deployed a number of tactical solutions within each of these three pillars. We also have Charlene Russell Tucker, who is the Commissioner of Education at the Connecticut State Department of Education. She was appointed by Governor Ned Lamont in August 2021, and until her appointment, she served as acting commissioner. Prior, she served as the department's deputy commissioner, a role in which she oversaw educational supports and wellness priorities. Previously, she served as chief operating officer and division chief for the department's Office of Student Supports and Organizational Effectiveness. Mackenzie Snow was appointed by Governor Kim Reynolds to lead the new Iowa Department of Education, including pre-K through 12 learning, teacher preparation and licensure, community colleges, and college aid beginning July 1, 2023. She previously served as Virginia Deputy Secretary of Education, as New Hampshire K-12 Learner Support Division Director. She also served as a special assistant to the president at the White House Domestic Policy Council, senior advisor at the Office of Management and Budget, and policy director at the U.S. Department of Education. Wow, we have such an amazing panel. We are want to say welcome to all of you. We're so excited to have you, and we look forward to engaging and learning from you. So now I'm excited to turn it over to Bill to get the conversation going.
Thanks, Emily. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Glad to be back with GLR to talk about something that's really important, particularly given the expiration of the funds, or the end of the funding, I should say. And as already indicated, through the ESSER funds, districts and states received a significant amount of additional revenue, a lot of it as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, and it was really to look at recovery efforts, but it was also to utilize those funds to do a variety of things, and a variety of things across some states and across districts. As already indicated, it was $190 billion that came about, or that was approved between March of 2020 and March of 2021. So it's a significant amount of money that came down through districts and to state departments. As indicated already, states had the opportunity to set aside 10% of those funds. And we have 4 esteemed panelists today who will talk a lot about how they use those funds to address issues that were specific to their context, to their state, what they were attempting to do. And let's not forget that a large portion of these funds were also designed to ensure that we were able to get children safely back into schools. And I don't want us to also lose sight of that now that all of us are back in schools. But to set the context, we have 4 individuals that have done things that Emily has already described. But just as you think about those things like learning recovery, opportunity grants, supporting underrepresented groups, Native tribes, BOCES, special populations, the teacher pipeline. It was a whole variety of things that happened in and across these states. And so I'd like to begin the conversation with our state chiefs. And I would like to ask each of you to begin with an overview of what the ESSER funds meant in terms of your state and your existing budget, and how your agency and position are situated in the state and the conditions that exist to enable districts to take advantage of the state-funded and promoted initiatives. And so what we're trying to do is just understand from all of you the context within your state, and to get at the differences in state agencies and the chief officers based on how the agency and leaderships are positioned in order to do that work. And so I'd like each chief to share a response. And Susanna, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to share about the work here in Colorado. And even as you were talking about it, I think it's just really helpful to kind of roll back the clock and put ourselves back into, March of 2020 and the really, really challenging times that we experienced as our entire country and world went through probably the most disruptive experience of our lifetimes as we moved schools from in-person to virtual. And, ESSER was such a huge part of how we were able to try to very, very quickly, rapidly respond to a completely different context for teaching and learning in the state of Colorado. For folks who don't know much about Colorado, we have the majority of kids in school districts kind of up and down the I-25 corridor, but the majority of districts are small and rural districts. At the time I was the superintendent in the Denver public schools, and even in a big place like Denver, we were not one-to-one with technology. And so one of the very first things that our state did was prioritize initiatives to try to get connectivity and resources to all districts across the state in terms of providing access. We very quickly provided funds for acceleration of learning. That was around initially like digital resources because kids weren't physically in classrooms. So really thinking about how to support the access to materials. We launched in Colorado a blended learning initiative that actually has had tremendous impact even now that kids are back in schools. And so a whole Colorado Digital Learning Consortium was created that now actually gives access. During COVID, kids needed access to online learning, but today in our rural school districts, if you're the only senior who wants to take an AP physics class, our Colorado Digital Learning system allows students to be able to do that. And so, there were a lot of things that were immediately about how do we create access and opportunity. I would say it then started to shift into how do we innovate, and throughout the entire time of ESSER, a big portion of the funding went to how do we recruit and retain high quality people, and particularly in areas that were under-resourced. So those are just a few of the things that we talked about where we made investments in Colorado.
Thanks, Susanna. And thank you for reminding us of like the difficulty and the times that we were facing of doing that period. And it just reminded me, in fact, I felt like I was starting to break out in hives again. I mean, so that like facilities that were not ready to receive children based on the types of ventilation that was needed, as an example, in Philadelphia. And so it just reminded me of all of the things that we were all of a sudden thrust into, that to help resolve the incredible disruption. ESSER funds were a means to start to get young people back into schools safely and on a regular basis. But I think one thing that you also mentioned, the innovation that came out of this and the things that we had not done before, but as a result of a need to educate children differently, those things have now become operational in many of our systems and in many of our states. So thank you for sharing that. Katie, I'll come to you next. Can you talk a little bit about your state?
Sure. Great to see all of the fellow chiefs on here. And thank you, Bill. I'm Katie Jenner from Indiana. A little bit of landscape and in context about Indiana. We serve 1.13 million children in a variety of school types. The vast majority, about 90%, go to traditional public schools, but we do have a very active school choice community with charter schools and private schools. So looking statewide, we have over 2,200 schools throughout our state, and K-12 makes up about half of our state budget. So about $10 billion approximately year over year. You know, it's interesting, Susanna said, imagine back. If you talk to a lot of state chiefs, many transitioned during the pandemic. So many who started are still not here today. There are a few. In my case, I started about 4 years ago. It was actually January of 2021. That was a time that most states in the country were either trying to keep kids in school, or in Indiana's case, we had most of our students in school other than some of our urban areas. And so it was trying to get them back to school urgently. But we also had another dynamic. Indiana had always had this was an elected position statewide. We had Democrat and Republican governors who worked over a period of years to make it appointed, mainly because we are half of the budget, and alignment with our governor is absolutely essential. So when coming in, if you look at the headlines back in 2018, 2019, 2020 in Indiana, there were a lot of strained relationships between the department, the General Assembly, the House, the Senate, the governor's office, externally. So in order to drive change within a crisis situation, it starts with consensus building and relationship building. So our team, when I came in as an appointed Secretary of Education, that's really where we started with relationship building. Also, we really pushed, and you'll hear me share more later, the value of being very transparent with the data. It can't just be the schools doing it alone. It has to be schools, community partners, others working together. And it starts with that data transparency, a lot of listening, ensuring in conversations students are kept as the priority. And then just being very honest about when people come in to complain about challenges, and we still hold this true in Indiana. Let's not spend our time admiring the problem. Let's focus in on solutions. And so that's always in beginning back at that point, we didn't have time to spin on problems. We had to focus in on some of the solutions at hand. A little bit about our historical academic context. With literacy specifically, we had been declining as a state for about a decade. Now, if you look at the NAEP scores, many of you will say, well, Indiana's still around 15th in the nation, but we used to be higher. So we had seen a decline over a period of about a decade. We saw that in the state data, national data. The pandemic only exacerbated this crisis as it did in many states across our country. So again, a lot of that consensus building and reviewing the data was so that we could build an army of people to get our foot on that gas pedal and keep it on there for kids. I think we'll hit on probably, Bill, some of the specific things here shortly, but just at a high level, literacy, STEM, rethinking high school, educator pipeline, where some of our main focus is. Again, glad to be on. Great to see my colleagues as well.
Thanks, Katie. And yes, we will hit on a couple of those points. And I love the consensus and relationship building, and want to talk more about that. And we'll talk a little bit about later in the conversation, I hope. We will talk about like those things that you wanted to require versus those things that were really important to build consensus around. And so we've heard from Colorado and Indiana. Now we'll move to Connecticut, and so Charlene, could you talk a little bit about your context in Connecticut?
Perfect. Thank you, Bill, and to my colleagues. Great to see you, to be able to share this space together. And you'll hear a little bit about what Katie mentioned and what Susanna mentioned as well, because I also was here just having agita thinking back to where we started during the pandemic. But just a little bit here, and so grateful for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading to have this convening of us today. But in Connecticut, also wanted to share that we're a system, it's right now 512,652 students. And every one of them, as I say constantly, they're important. That's why I don't say over 500,000. I get right down to the number very specifically. And of that, 275,000 are students of color. 225,000 are eligible for free or reduced price meals, 92,000 students with disability, 54,000 English language multilingual learners, speaking over 180 languages, supporting over 100,000 school staff. We are a diverse school system. And so that is really important. And this year, our theme is the universe of possibilities. That's where we are for this school year for all of them. But going back to COVID, I'll share with kind of what we did then. But one of the things that underpin all our efforts, I think Katie just mentioned that, is our longstanding focus on what I call best-in-class collaboration. Working together, listening to one another in search of common ground for the sake of all our students. And so policies, it's just my belief that policy is designed without hearing different perspectives and without our constituents' input and feedback are not likely to produce the intended and needed results. So that's our school districts, that's our families, that's our policymakers, that's my governor's office, that's our State Board of Education, everyone together. And those are all the groups that we engaged as we were trying to figure out what to do as these funds were coming in. And we also went from what I call, right, the first set of funds we had was just survival. We were in survival mode with the first pot of money that we received. It was personal protective equipment. It was about the cleaning services. I mean, all of those things, like right there, that's what we were thinking about. And then the second amount of dollars came into us, and we said, now let's move from acute crisis response to really start thinking about how do we thrive in this environment. And then the other pot of money came in, and we were like, okay, we've gone from surviving to thriving. How about transforming? It's kind of where we said for the last pot of money that we received. So from surviving to really transforming our system. With that said, we decided that we needed to have really some priorities that was guiding not only your district, priorities guiding not only your district's investments and spending, but what we were also doing with our set-aside fund. So we established some spending investment priorities: learning acceleration, academic renewal, and student enrichment. The first big bucket, right? We know some of that was required. But I also added to that family and community connections as another priority. Then we had social, emotional, mental health of our students, school staff, another investment priority. We also did strategic use of technology and staff development around addressing the digital divide that we were all working with. Another funding priority, and finally, building safe and healthy schools. Bill, you talk about HVAC systems and all of those. So we established these these investment priorities that we held ourselves to, and we also held our districts to in their whatever they were going to do. So we put out state level guidance with investment recommendations. We called it Reimagining Schools to Transform Student Lives. So we did that, and we integrated our ESSER, Every Student Succeeds Act, or targets that were already established in our plan. We integrated those targets, and we had a required needs assessment. We had our districts develop SMART goals based on their established needs, and internal to the agency or agency managers reviewed and approved the applications that came in, and continue to remind folks about their drawdowns and what needs to happen, and continuing monitoring of that. But we also collaborated with our superintendents organization, the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, to deploy ESSER advisors to support our large districts. These were folks who could be thought partners really around the work. So we had all of these established and really focused on, at the time, the students that were populations who were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, including our students of color or students with disabilities. I gave you those numbers, or English multilingual learners, those experiencing homelessness, those who were disengaged in foster care, those from low-income households, those the juvenile justice system, and those who just experienced barriers to remote learning. So we've really used the data, really we're very much data-driven, and we talk some more about that later, to say, okay, we have these resources. Here are the investment priorities, districts. We're going to hold ourselves to it. We're going to hold you to it. And we're going to support you, though, right, as you develop the plans for utilizing those investments. So that was kind of the big picture of how we entered into the space with the 3 pots of money that came in, and we moved on from there.
Thanks, Charlene. And I love the surviving to thriving to transforming. And I want to talk a lot more about that as we continue this session. But I want to move quickly to Mackenzie, our colleague in Iowa. And Mackenzie will ask, I'm asking for you to give your state context.
Happy to, and thank you so much to, again, our hosts for continuing to facilitate these important conversations on how to best leverage this tremendous investment, as well as for their partnership with a dozen plus community-based organizations across Iowa. And of course, thanks to my incredible colleagues across Colorado, Connecticut, and Indiana for their leadership, as you're already hearing. Just briefly, Iowa's statewide population is about 3.2 million, with about 515,000 K-12 students. About 42% of our student population is eligible for free and reduced price lunch, and about 13.5% are students with disabilities. About 7.5% are students who are English language learners. Like Susanna, Iowa has a large number of districts, about 325 public school districts, and about 37 of those districts have enrollment that exceeds 2,500 students. So our largest school district is about 30,000 students. Our smallest school district is about 50 students. And obviously the needs of those districts and those school communities are very diverse based on their characteristics. And then we also have about 214 accredited non-public schools and about 13 authorized charter schools. And then just some context setting for the broader state agency. Emily mentioned that the Iowa Department of Education has experienced government-wide alignment, and our team now represents the work of previously 5 separate state education agencies. So beginning last July, we now include PK through 12 learning, Iowa School for the Deaf, Iowa Educational Services for the Blind and Visually Impaired, Teacher Preparation, Licensure, Community Colleges, and Iowa College Aid. So that really provides us an incredible opportunity to support lifelong learning beginning in early childhood all the way through post-secondary pathways. I want to spend a quick moment on our achievement data because it is so critical to advising our policymaking and decision-making processes. Iowa prioritized just keeping schools open and students in the classroom throughout the pandemic, and that is the main driver of why our students experienced minimal to no COVID-related learning loss compared to the nation. Our long-term results in English language arts show that proficiency increased across grades 4 through 8 with significant gains in middle schools, gains of 7 to 8 percentage points. But our long-term trends also show modest proficiency decreases in grade 3. And that really helped inform our focus on evidence-based early literacy instruction and the science of reading in particular. And then our long-term results in math also show proficiency increases in grades 3 and middle school with percentage point gains of 5+ percentage points. But it also indicates significant decreases in grade 7, a decrease of 7 percentage points. And that really informed our focus on Algebra 1 in grade 9 and our new mathematics standards. So at the same time where we saw students across the states experience very little impact of COVID-related learning loss, we also see that concerning achievement gaps persist in Iowa, especially among students with disabilities and students who are English language learners. In ELA, we've got 45 and 53 percentage point achievement gaps experienced by students with disabilities and students who are English language learners, respectively. And in math, that's 41 and 45 percentage points. This concerning achievement gap data is also shown in our 22 NAEP rankings statewide in grade 4 reading. For the all student group, we ranked 15th, but we ranked 40th among students with disabilities and 44th for the achievement experienced by students who are English language learners. So this achievement gap data is informing all of our decisions, all of our actions, and you'll see that throughout our investments in our top 4 priorities around strong teacher pipeline, narrowing and closing achievement gap, multiple pathways to post-secondary success, and finally, evidence-based reading instruction.
Thanks, Mackenzie. And that is an impressive set of outcomes from Iowa. And so congratulations on your good work. And to all 4 of you, congratulations on many of the things that you have started or implemented and the success that was that was a result of that. And so I will ask, and some of you hit on some of these things already, but want to do it with a little more specificity. And now now that we all understand the context, and some of you talked about some of the top efforts you launched or expanded using ESSER dollars, but I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about why you prioritize those particular strategies or initiatives. And so if you could please share just a couple of things you launched or expanded using ESSER dollars, and then talk about the results you've seen. Mackenzie, you just did that, particularly around some of your literacy results and some of the math work that you did. But this time, let's start with Katie.
Well, yeah, it was fantastic to learn from some of my chiefs across the nation where they are today. The one thing that I know is impacting all of us that I would just raise from the last question is the impact on chronic absenteeism and getting students back in. I know we're all facing that. So just wanted to throw that out there for all of us to consider if we have time. So I'm going to hit 3 big areas. Bill. So first one, academic supports. I mentioned our literacy data, where we were. We had seen virtually a decade of decline. The pandemic further exacerbated that challenge. So we launched with a major investment. Some of it was federal dollars. A lot was Lilly Endowment Philanthropy in our Indiana General Assembly. We invested in an Indiana literacy cadre, which was basically a copycat version of the Mississippi Miracle, which again, I think probably most people on this call know what happened in Mississippi. If you don't, you should put that action item on your list to learn more. But we realized many of our teachers needed a lot of support in learning the science of reading strategies. And so right out of the gate, we had 41 schools in 2022. 2 years later, today we have almost 500 elementary schools. All of that, for the most part, is opt-in, with a few of our low-performing schools being required to be a part of that literacy cadre. I am most excited about the literacy data in two different places. Number one, our Black students over the past 3 years have jumped 7% approximately. Our special education free reduced lunch students have increased significantly as well. We had the largest year-over-year increase this past year, but the most exciting part is the return on investment from that Indiana literacy cadre. Of the schools who were participants, they improved 2.5% versus the schools who were non-literacy cadre schools only improved 0.2%. So we're leaning in more on that investment, lean in on what works, keep investing there, cut out what doesn't work. So another investment that we made in Indiana is it was a competitive grant focused on science of reading, where the local district could design what they wanted to do to support their teachers versus the other, which was a copy off of Mississippi Miracle. What we found with that competitive grant that we invested in, we only saw 0.1%. So that those millions of dollars that we invested competitively, we will now reallocate, because again, a lot of those are state dollars. A second thing I'll highlight in the academic supports, Indiana Learns, that is essentially a ESSA for parents. During the pandemic, we had quite a few parents who raised their hand and said, I know that my child is struggling. I'm working 2 jobs. I can't pay for additional tutoring. I don't know what to do. So we launched where a parent could be eligible to up to $1,000 for tutoring if they met certain parameters, if they were on free reduced lunch, and if they were struggling with ELA or math. That return on investment data is back. We have not publicly released that, but you will see us planning to sustain, asking the General Assembly this coming session to sustain that support because of the positive ROI. Also in that space, we launched, as many states did, summer learning. The most statistical significant return on investment was right in Marion County. That's our state capital, Indianapolis. They worked with meaning the Mind Trust and United Way of Central Indiana, worked with all school types to deploy very specific summer learning. That moved the needle, again, more so than any of our summer learning grants throughout the state. So we said, all right, if this works here in Marion County, could it work in rural Indiana, urban, suburban? So we launched the What Works grant to try it. To see if that would move the needle. And again, that ROI data is just starting to come back. Stay tuned on that. It was positive, and I don't want to get too in front of myself because I haven't shared this too much publicly, but one of the student populations we were really concerned about is we're seeing most recovering, other than we're still struggling with our English learners and Hispanic students to recover. And so we are very focused on how might we move the needle there. And we saw some positive gains with those two that I just mentioned. Crossing the finish line. In Indiana, you may know we're #1 in the nation for students leaving with college credit. The average student leaves, about 64% of our students leave with college credit, and the average student leaves with 13.5 credits, which is this close to completing a credential of value, educational attainment. like 1 to 2 to 3 classes. So we ran the data with all of our higher education programs and said, okay, we will pay for all the tuition fees, books, if they complete their credential. We had hundreds of students, actually thousands of students, jump in to this opportunity, learned a lot from there, mainly that parents and families and students and school counselors didn't even realize they were that close to completing a credential. So it's totally impacted our rethinking high school and how we can, again, save students a lot of time and money. Impact data, since 2021, we've saved students and families nearly $12 million in tuition fees, textbook costs, and students have earned approximately 4,000 credentials beyond what we were already doing at the high school level, which again is very big for our state. Second big area, the educator pipeline. When we came in 4 years ago, a lot of people immediately said, gosh, we have a teacher shortage. We have a teacher shortage. We have a bus driver shortage. We just have a shortage. We wanted to know where and how do we triage. So we launched a supply demand marketplace. The demand is all of our school types. Post started with just teachers, but now it's all positions and it's live transparent data. You can see it. So that's the demand. The supply would be what our educator prep colleges or other preparation programs are offering, and then connecting the supply demand. The other thing this has allowed us to do is triage where we need it the most. The number one area we needed is special education. So we launched a major initiative where we've had over 1,600 new teachers enter special education in Indiana, really helping to close that. ITEL was launched after the success of special ed. That's for EL teachers. Our trajectory is going up in Indiana, like most states, but our data in terms of teachers certified was plateauing, so we needed to increase there. Again, a lot of participants and completers, and they're staying in the profession. The third area we launched last year in June was in STEM. And again, as a significant number of people involved in that. Third big area is re-envisioning how we measure school and student performance. We launched the Indiana GPS, indianagps.com. You can check it out. It connects K-12 data, higher education data, and business and industry data in one platform for every single school in Indiana, all school types. I think the exciting part of this is now you can look up any high school. This is just as an example, any high school in Indiana, and you can see, okay, what is that graduating class's sustainable employment? What are they doing a year after in terms of employment or enrollment? By the way, enlistment data we don't have from the federal government yet. I know many states would like that as a plug. And then also median wage. So we're really pushing on connecting our data systems to best inform how we might move the needle ahead. What this will also build is we're an at-risk system that we have schools piloting right now that essentially takes those Indiana GPS indicators, and there's predictive analysis, statistical analysis done to predict if a child has these indicators that are struggling early, it would show their risk level and how to overcome that. But a lot of lessons learned with COVID. The big is return on investment and killing the things that are not working and focusing on what is.
Yeah, no, Katie, thank you. And congratulations on all of those outstanding accomplishments and achievements, particularly for your students. It's a question that I have as a follow-up, but I don't want you to follow up. I don't want you to respond now. We can respond because we want to hear from some of your colleagues. But you started talking about the Indiana literacy cadre and the success that you've seen, so much so that you redirected funds from another initiative into that initiative. And you talked about the schools that are participating. And so my question would be if when you see that kind of success at the state level, is it important then to require systems who have not yet achieved that to participate? And so, in other words, do you see policy in that circumstance as like a catalyst to improve or to get engagement and participation? Or is it just necessary in order to do those things? We'll come back to you to get that answer. And Charlene, we'll move to you next. And if you could talk specifically about, we said 3 or 4, we're going to shift it to 1 to 2, right? So that we can get more in.
All right, now that works. And a few things that I could talk about, because there's so much to talk about: our summer enrichment, all of that program, and our high dosage tutoring and all of that. But I wanted to start with something that was really something that we thought about very early on when the funding arrived. What about sustainability? How do you sustain this when the funds, we know, was only here for a limited period of time, right? We knew that from the very beginning. So a friend of mine for us was thinking about sustainability. So one of the things that we established was rigorous evaluation, effectiveness of our initiatives. And so we established the Connecticut COVID-19 Education Research Collaborative, referred to as CGLR, a research partnership between the department and institutions of higher education in Connecticut. This brings together researchers from public and private universities across Connecticut to work collaboratively on these evaluations. So, and given what we've seen in the impact, we've now kind of renamed it. It's not COVID-19 anymore. Same, where we rebranded it as the Center for Connecticut Education Research Collaboration, keeping the same acronym. But the purpose of this was to have almost like real-time, rigorous evaluation of our investments, right? So really important right now, and I know we've posted the link, we're evaluating summer enrichment, we're evaluating the theory of action around the ESSER plans, remote learning audit, and the learner engagement and attendance program, which I'll speak to as kind of the next thing that we talk about. Katie mentioned addressing chronic absence. But this research collaboration allows us to understand the results of our investments and to answer the question I ask all the time: so what? You've invested all of this, so what? So our initiatives are targeted, they're data informed, and we are actually measuring impact. So that is something that we're really pleased about, that we have available to us. Can you imagine leveraging the power of researchers from our institutions in Connecticut to be able to specifically work on what we're investing in education? So that really is important. And so one of the investments that the researchers did was the learner engagement and attendance program that we stood up to address chronic absence in Connecticut. And so we know it works. The LEAP program is a relational home visiting program that allows home visitors to literally go and establish or reestablish relationships with families. Why are your child not in school? What's happening? What do we need? How do we support you? And so we were able to, in going back to 2021, we established monthly, we had in-person, hybrid, or remote learning, and we had all of that. We started collecting data at the state level on a monthly basis. So we knew at the end of each month what was happening with attendance across the state. That data, so we saw the numbers actually rising, and we could see that. That allowed us to go back to a collaboration that I talked about earlier, our governor's office and the other partners. The governor's office, with the GEAR funding, which is the governor's education relief funding, invested millions of dollars. I think it started out with $10 million for us to really design this learner engagement and attendance program. So imagine, and then we were able to evaluate to find what is the impact of this program on getting students back into school. So what you hear me say, what we were able to, the governor invested, then we have the American Rescue Plan through the legislature, further investment. So these were all these COVID relief funding across sectors now deployed to make sure that this program, which is now considered a best practice based on our LEAP evaluation that we have, about really making it work across our state. So we're really pleased to have developed this. And so what are the results? We're seeing this commitment really paying off. We've seen attendance rates year-over-year improvements, chronic absenteeism declining from 23.7% when we just were in the pandemic, 21-22, to 20% now down to 17%. So we're seeing, and those are actual numbers. We've gone from 117,000 students chronically absent to this past year, we're down to 87,000 students chronically absent. Now, there is still a lot of work to do. We're not waving the victory flag here because we want to make sure all our students are attending schools every day. But this past year, we also saw 158 of 197 districts with improved attendance this past year, and every student group also had improvements in their attendance rate. So it's really important for us that we invested this way. And why is this so important? I think Mackenzie talked about their outcomes, but we know attendance lays the foundation for effective learning, impacting student growth and achievement, and continued recovery and acceleration efforts that we're also determined to achieve. So when we're able to see that there's something that we've invested in, and we've seen the outcomes again through the evaluation, that after a home visit, right, we now see the numbers of students and the impact on attendance even after a one home visit. So we now have information, we have a research-driven program that is actually making a difference, all because we use the data to basically spur action in developing a program that we now know from the evaluation that it works, and it is a best practice, it is evidence-based, and we're really proud to have that. So the research collaborative that is now helping us really be able to say what's working in what we're investing in, right? And so we have that information there, to an attendance program that's given us results, are the two that I just wanted to share with us here.
Charlene, really appreciate that. And I know Emily put in the chat, it was a link to an article from Forbes about Connecticut's funding what works in education recovery. They can prove it. And so I appreciate the examples you just provided. Mackenzie, we'll come to you and ask you to talk about one or two things that that you want to give us more context and information on.
Thank you so much. And as Charlene so aptly said, we are really focusing on transforming, on advancing our vision of a best-in-class education system that sees every child, that meets every child where they are, that provides them what they need to meet high expectations and to ultimately realize their incredible potential. So we have articulated our top 4 priorities, all of which are built on a foundation of vibrant, safe, and healthy learning environments. Again, there's strong teacher pipeline through recruitment and retention, narrowing and closing achievement gaps through accountability and support, and empowering students with multiple pathways to post-secondary success. But I'm going to focus on strengthening early literacy and evidence-based reading instruction for this conversation. And obviously, all of those priorities are deeply integrated. But to dive into strengthening early literacy, the Governor Reynolds directed a over $9 million investment to ensure statewide access to evidence-based professional learning, or LETRS, to up to 6,600 educators. And that included our ESSER funds providing stipends for completion for teachers in schools who are identified in most need of support. And we really view this as very complementary as we build our in-service teacher knowledge to our recent legislation that's intended to support pre-service teachers with teacher preparation programs that are aligned to evidence-based reading instruction. And that's legislation the state is implementing now. Another significant investment in early literacy has been with our summer reading grants. And those summer reading grants actually implemented EPS Learning's Amira personalized tutoring, and that is proven to accelerate student achievement and foundational reading skills, and is especially effective for students with disabilities and students who are English language learners, and operates also in Spanish. It is grounded in the science of reading, and it uses voice recognition technology to provide real-time, in-the-moment tutoring that includes corrective feedback as students read aloud. And we saw the effectiveness of this tool in our summer reading grant participants. So we have expanded that intelligent personalized reading tutoring statewide to include next summer and throughout the school year. And this was just announced last month, and we already have over 135 participating school districts, over 12,000 students already utilizing their licenses. And that personalized tutoring, again, is directly integrated with another legislative advancement from this past session in our newly enacted personalized reading plans for students who are not proficiently reading through the end of 6th grade. That personalized reading tutoring can be incorporated as one of the interventions to ensure that students are supported in getting on track to be proficient readers by the end of 3rd grade. So again, these investments really build on our comprehensive advancements in literacy. We have world-class state content standards that were just adopted this spring, the statewide professional learning, our teacher preparation program alignment, our evidence-based summer reading programs, the statewide personalized tutoring, and personalized reading plans for students in need of support. And through these investments, we were able to come alongside existing efforts of school districts and the state legislature to ensure comprehensive support for implementation. And I look forward to sharing more later about teacher pipeline and multiple pathways to post-secondary success. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Mackenzie. And as an individual who works in an organization that does personalized and competency-based learning and helps systems set the conditions for that, I'm excited to hear about your personalized reading plans and your personalized tutoring. And so thank you on behalf of my organization for doing that work, particularly at the state level. Susanna, can you talk a little bit about Colorado?
Sure. It's so impressive to hear the work that's going on around the country. And so I was taking notes actually as people were sharing because I'm just so interested in all of this work. I'll share 2 things. One that is like a very quintessentially Colorado use of the funds, and then one that's kind of a little bit unusual for Colorado, but I think speaks to our deep belief in evidence-based practices. So the first one that I'll talk about that is very, very Colorado, we used ESSER funds to incentivize grants around a program that we called our Rural Co-Action. And it was a way to match up rural districts, sometimes with other rural districts around the state, and sometimes with larger, more urban districts, to create programs that really focused on bringing more diverse post-secondary readiness, workforce readiness, and community-based approaches to expand opportunities for kids. We did this through grants that we put out both to school districts and to partner agencies. And so we had a variety of different approaches. Colorado is a very local control state. And so I say it's a very quintessentially Colorado approach because it really invested in the ideas and the needs of local communities, bringing people together to solve some of the meatiest problems. And what we've seen as a result of that is a dramatic expansion in concurrent enrollment opportunities, in work-based learning opportunities, and actually communities creating internship opportunities through local businesses, which just hadn't been happening to the same degree prior to this. So a really, really big focus on helping get particularly our adolescents future focused by bringing together communities. So that was one that was like a very, very Colorado example. And then one that's maybe a little bit less typical of Colorado. You know, we don't have state adopted curriculum in Colorado. But one of the places where we used funding was for a statewide license for ZERN. This came through a collaboration with our governor's office, and the funding that the governor also had around ESSER funds, ARP funds, and Colorado, like many places, just saw the bottom drop out in math scores during the pandemic. And we knew that we needed an evidence-based approach to supporting accelerated performance in math. So every student in K through 8th grade has access to a ZERN license. And we've seen really dramatic increases up to a 1.5 growth in the time when students are using ZERN. And math actually is the place where we've seen year over year since we resumed testing in 2021, we've seen increases in math performance at every grade across K through 8. And certainly there's a lot that goes into that. You know, we needed to see it. It had dropped so dramatically. We needed to see that improvement. We've had a major investment in our educators around this, but certainly tools like ZERN and the evidence base in a tool like ZERN, not a typical Colorado approach to have a common resource like that, but one that we think really has paid off in terms of the results that we've seen.
Susanna, thank you. And you're right. I mean, that was when you were sharing that, I was like, I think, well, she's still in Colorado, right? So that's fantastic to have everyone with access to that license. So we've talked a little bit about, well, we've talked a lot about some of the things that you were able to do through your fantastic and thought-provoking leadership. Now I want to talk a little bit about as you reflect, I mean, and you reflect on the things that worked well, the hurdles you may have had to overcome. So now with the benefit of hindsight, are there things that you would do differently? And how are the lessons that you've learned impacting your thinking and decision-making for your budget and your investments in the future, especially after the ESSER funds are no longer available? And Charlene, we'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit from Connecticut's perspective?
Certainly. And I think we started out when we talked about data, and I said I'm data obsessed. And we talked a little bit about how we've used data to inform what it is that we're investing in, and also to really talk about sustainability. Really important, I believe, that we continue to work on, and here in Connecticut, as I mentioned, our research collaborative is not going away. We rebranded and renamed it because it is so important that we know the return on investment for what it is that we're doing. And actually, I'm using what we're learning there to make the case. And I'll go back case in point. Our summer enrichment grant that we received under COVID was $11 million. And we deployed those $11 million. We had the research collaborative do an evaluation. And because of that, it translated into $22 million more. So the 11 became 33 with ARP ESSER funding that we were able to receive. The same was true with the LEAP program, where we got additional funding because we were able to make the case about what works. And so it is really important, I believe, and I had the privilege to testify in front of Congress a couple of times, and I made the same case to them that any program funded should come with monies funding for evaluation. We need to be able to answer the question, so what? when we make an investment. And that's what we're all talking about here. So that is something that I say is a best practice that will continue. Imagine now being able to go to the legislature and say, here's this thing we tried during COVID. Oh, by the way, we know it works. We know there's results. Now it's your turn, right, to invest in that. And I think that is just something that I think is really important. So that is a lesson learned, to continue to try to make the case for being able to answer the so what question when we make an investment into a program or into an initiative. The other takeaway here is give voice to those most directly impacted by your decisions. And even though I know COVID, I think it was the ARP ESSER funds required that you reach out to different constituents and you do stakeholder engagement, that has to be a best practice. And oh, by the way, never forget the voice of our students. We also, another program I could have talked about, Bill, but if we had time, was our Voice for Change program, which was a first in its kind in our state that we launched to give students, put the power of what are you going to do with your COVID dollars in the hands of students. And we did that through a project here where high schoolers were able to develop projects along with their ESSER, by our ESSER priorities. They developed projects. It was a civic engagement project. It had to be voted on by students. They had to campaign. They had to vote. And at the end, we funded projects. And what they told us through these projects, for example, that was social emotional learning was important to them. Most of the projects was about social emotional mental health supports. And so we really learned a lot, and they did lasting investments, some of which have turned into programs that are now going forward in their school districts. So we have to make sure that those closest, that we're constantly hearing from our educators, hearing from our students, and those closest to the work that we're doing. And then the other thing I'd say is the need for data transparency. I think Katie talked about that up front, but I am so, we've got to be able to make sure that we're constantly speaking truth to power with putting the information in that space. And our team here, shout out to them in our performance office. I call us Dashboards Are Us, because we're constantly developing dashboards to make sure that the community at large, so policymakers or family members or community organizations, have a reliable and holistic picture of our successes and the areas that we need attention in. I think that is really important. And so making sure that we're able to do that as leaders for all of us. I know one of the questions, what would you say to other leaders? It's about developing trust in the work that we do. And Franklin Covey's book that talks about the speed of trust. One thing that changes everything is that we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge others by their behaviors. So the fastest way to restore trust is to make and keep those commitments, even the small commitments that we make to others and to ourselves. And so my commitment to Connecticut is transparency with the data that we have. And even if it doesn't look pretty, that we want to make sure it's there, because I really believe it then brings us together to figure out how to together work on what needs to be done. So those are three things I think are really important as we go forward, that we are paying close attention to, listen to those voices closest to where we want to impact change. Authentically that way. It's not a check the box, but it is really authentically listening to all of those in the space that we're talking to them, and not forgetting the students, making sure that we have a total commitment to the data, make sure initiatives are targeted, data informed, and that we're measuring impact.
Charlene, I love that. And because, you know, sometimes classrooms or the individuals you're trying to impact are a long ways away from like where policies are being made. And so when you talk to those individuals who are being impacted, that you want to impact, does that then inform your policy, your implementation, how you allocate resources, or all of the above?
All of it. It really is all of the above, right?
Yeah.
When you understand, because you think you're making the best decisions, But then when you go on the ground and those in the front lines, you hear what you thought is not exactly how things are happening around an implementation standpoint. And we know there's a whole science around implementation. So constantly having that touch point. I shared earlier my background. I'm not in my office because I'm out on location today meeting with the Commissioners Roundtable for Family and Community Engagement in Education. I've got a group of folks that I'm listening to that represent the voice of families and communities to hear what are your experiences and what do we need to do differently. So yes, it's impacting our policy, it's impacting implementation. And as I say to them, we're always listening so we can hear and learn. And also I engage them to also, we're going into a legislative session, talk to your legislators. They also need to hear from you how they're experiencing the work that we're doing, what they're funding, right, and the impact that we're receiving.
Fantastic. Dashboards are us. You will hear that again. All right. So, Susanna.
Yeah, in thinking about the challenges, I think that we actually really struggled with getting the right evaluation considerations. So Charlene, I'm listening a lot and taking a lot of notes as you're talking. That was one of the areas that we struggled for sure. So I won't talk about that as much, but I do want to just talk a little bit about a challenge that we've had that addresses some of the questions in the chat. So, Colorado is experiencing declining enrollment statewide, with the exception of a couple of districts kind of in the northern agricultural areas. We have a varied landscape in terms of districts that are unionized or not. We have real complexity around housing and challenges with housing, particularly in our rural areas, because of the impact of resort communities. And I think frequently many of our districts with an influx of ESSER funds decided to make some long-term investments with salaries. And it was, I think, the case where it was really hard not to come to agreements, particularly in a unionized context, around salary increases, and a hope that there might be fixes coming through the state budget longer term. You're sort of sitting on some ESSER funds and putting some investments in. Many places initially we're not putting it into salary, we're putting it into new positions, and we frankly didn't see people materialize for those new positions. And so they ended up putting money into compensation for their existing employees. And I think we're now seeing a very challenging budget landscape, both in terms of the roll-off from ESSER, the investments that have been made in salaries, and declining enrollment, and then a tighter state budget context as well. So I would definitely say that one of the long-term challenges that we're grappling with in Colorado is like, how do we get the right balance of paying our teachers what we know they need, grappling with the lack of housing and the cost of housing, and a tightening state budget, particularly as the ESSER funds roll off.
Yep, really important questions. No, we're running short on time. In order to get to the questions, and I saw some in the question in the Q&A, and we'll get to those. But Katie, I'll ask you the same thing. Like, given hindsight, are there things, and you gave a great example, but are there other things that you would do differently?
Yeah, this is, like the others have said, this has been a massive growth opportunity as a leader to lead through times such as this. And I wouldn't trade it for anything, even with the headaches, but probably coming in one of the biggest challenges that I don't know I saw completely is how slow state bureaucracy moves. And when we're trying to move the needle quickly for kids, it really became a challenge. And I see Susanna shaking her head. Several state chiefs were on mass text strands, just almost like therapy at times on how slow contracts were moving. And especially when we all wanted resources quickly, there was a slow hiring people. It's the little things here and there. So we strategically, in order to move faster, number one, sometimes the governor's chief of staff was on my speed dial if something was moving too slow. So know who you can call and get things done. But number two, instead of philanthropies giving money straight to the department where it gets trapped in state agencies and then it has to go here and all these people have to sign off, we started working with external partners. Philanthropies send the money there, then we'll work with them directly. So again, if we're trying to move the needle for kids and knowing, friends, a state chief's shelf life is not that long. It's a lot. I mean, you can look at that statistically. We've got to go faster than what we're doing. The second big thing, and you hit on this earlier, Bill, as your consensus building, what do we require everyone to do at once, and what do we allow opt-in and try to scale? Oh gosh, there are a number of lessons I learned on that. We've been very, very successful with opt-in, but there are some things that we've had to require in the space of reading that has just not been very popular, but we have no time to waste. So those would be just a couple.
Really appreciate that. Thank you, Katie. Mackenzie, talk about Iowa.
Happy to, thank you. Just to zoom up as we enter the Q&A portion, as a reminder, our ESSER alone was about 122 billion, which is, for context and as a reminder, more than 30 times the size of the $4 billion Race to the Top fund. So these were truly a tremendous, extraordinary investment of resources. So we, of course, have that dual responsibility to leverage these extraordinary resources to support student-centered systems improvement, but then also ensuring the transparency of the use of the funds. And I've had the opportunity to administer these 3 tranches of ESSER funds from the U.S. Department of Education, from New Hampshire, from Virginia, and Iowa for the past and final year of their performance period. So a couple ideas on to avoid and to consider. Obviously, investments that don't directly impact student learning and do not have proven success in narrowing and closing achievement gaps. And folks have mentioned this before, but again, to zoom in on avoiding recurring expenses that cannot be sustained. And many states and many districts found it really helpful to create multi-year spending plans that began to leverage state and local funds to sustain programs before the federal funds would run out. So for example, year 1 might be 100% in federal investment, then year 2, 75% federal, 25% state and local, and so on. And then the last component on think about or to avoid is just to be really mindful about who's already implementing what to avoid field overwhelm and implementation, because we all know that the success of these statewide programs and efforts and systems improvements all hinges on the incredible work of those implementing in our schools and classrooms across the states and across the nation. And then one significant consider, I think we've all talked about how the investments directly align to our statewide priorities or other ARP investments or legislative investments. But I also want to talk about braiding funds and complementary investments in particular. So we talked about one of our top priorities is multiple pathways to post-secondary success. And through our ESSER state set aside, we provided about $2.5 million in credentials to career grants to support CTE programs and aligning to the attainment of an industry recognized credential. And that really was complementary to our new statutory definition of work-based learning and our updated state plan, our revised new state accountability system that includes work-based learning and industry recognized credentials in our post-secondary readiness indicator. There was huge demand, very successful program, but also a remaining need for credentials to childcare careers. And thus the governor invested governor's state and local fiscal recovery funds, or SLFRF funds, in a specific program to support family and consumer science programs to aligning to the attainment of a child development associate, so that communities could recruit and retain an early childhood workforce that was of and for their community, and also so that we could expand access to high quality child care to support working families and to best support students and teachers who are parents of young children. And I know each of us has many examples of the power and the amplifying impact of complementary investments, but that's just one to take away.
Thanks, Mackenzie. And I want to thank, this incredible panel of state chiefs, and congratulate all of you on your work, and thank you for your work, and thank you for your resilience and perseverance through what had to have been tough and challenging times. And so as an individual who was at the district level, just really appreciate all the work and the thought that went, and the thinking that went into how to set the conditions to allow systems to take advantage of these opportunities. And so want to thank Charlene from Connecticut, Katie from Indiana, Susanna from Colorado, and Mackenzie from Iowa. Thank you so much. We're going to transition to Q&A for a few minutes here. We have a few minutes to do the Q&A. And Emily, I'm going to ask you to help, but I saw a couple of questions in the Q&A in the queue. And so one is, there are two that are related, and one in particular talks about unions and how did unions impact implementation of any of your changes. And this may have been one specifically to you, Charlene, and how did teacher unions react to data transparency? And so any individual can have a shot at it, but I do think, Charlene, one is specific to the data transparency question.
Certainly. And, so our union partners, I meet with our union partners regularly. And so when I talk about meeting with all our stakeholders, they are a part of it. And so we meet, share where we're headed, have really great conversations, be informed by impacts on that end. And sometimes I've had opportunities to meet directly with our educators as well, and have roundtables with them to hear directly. So we really try very hard to have an open dialogue. And we've not had any negative responses to really just making the data publicly available. It is there. And so I think everyone they've gotten used to the fact that we're just going to put the information there. And have conversations around them, that there's certain data points that we certainly give previews, certainly towards school districts, right? So they can be prepared for questions that they may even get from the press before they have it. But we really make sure it's there. And we've not had any negative repercussions on that. There, I think everybody understands they'll use the information, whatever constituent group, based on what areas that they're working on, and we'll put that out there. But we just released information on teacher vacancies, for example, and different groups use it differently. But the bottom line is it's there, and we're making it available so we can all have conversations around it.
I really appreciate that, Charlene. I couldn't help but think, like, the notion of using data as information, simply they're just facts, and it's to inform and to improve. And not to judge, right? And so therefore, individuals will then feel informed and feel like they can use it to improve. But
that's right.
And,
it
creates a whole different environment if it's used to judge, right?
That's right. It's data, and it's a tell the truth in a way people can verify is a quote, right? And so you have the information there, and they can use it however it fits their priorities.
I really appreciated how Katie framed her remarks earlier too, with some of the stuff that was going on at state government level, and that it's all about relationships, and that's exactly what Charlene just said too.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go to? We just posted our poll. This is just to get your feedback, and I just want to say that we take this very, very, very extremely seriously, and we talk about it every week. So please take a few minutes to complete the poll that's in front of you. As we keep on going through the questions. So this is a good question from Ms. Jarrett. So you've mentioned the decline in enrollment. So any insights in your states? Where are the students going instead of your public schools? Have you seen trends in your state?
So I can certainly speak a little bit to it for the Colorado context. In part, we just have fewer school-aged children in Colorado. We had a fascinating presentation by our state demographer just about a year ago. People are starting to have families later in Colorado. It used to be about 25 to 35 was when people started families. That shifted from 30 to 40. We have a big group of people who are just getting ready to enter their 30s, but whether or not they have families is really going to be predicated on whether or not they have housing that is conducive to having families and they can afford it, whether or not we have enough water for the housing to actually be built. So that's a real challenge that we have in Colorado. So we have fewer kids. We did see a big increase in the number of families that were homeschooling their children. And we know that actually because we have a program that we call homeschool enrichment, where you can get part-time funding as a homeschool family by participating in public school opportunities. So we definitely know that there were more families that have been homeschooling their children since the pandemic.
Thank you. Anybody else with trends? If they're not in public schools, where they're going?
Yeah, so I mentioned Indiana is very much a school choice state. So we have about 1 million students, so 87%. I said earlier, rounding, about 90%, but 87% in our traditional public, 5% in charter, and 8% in non-public. We are seeing more students going to non-public, choosing that option.
And the follow-up.
Still though, the vast majority of students do go to.
And so the follow-up question there: are there strategies that you see districts using to regain and increase enrollment?
So when you're a state that has a free market, you better do a great job educating kids. So that's how schools are getting kids back. I mean, schools are getting kids back if their literacy data is improving, if their math data is improving. They're getting kids back if they're engaging at the middle school level, if they are providing other services at the middle school level that maybe a parent is interested in seeing. At the high school level, it's all about, and Susanna mentioned this a bit, more and more parents are being drawn to the opportunities of earning credentials of value and having a work-based learning experience. So it really is, and I'm speaking as I was a traditional public school teacher, school leader, district leader, but when Indiana started to move to school choice, years back, we thought our product was pretty darn good. But that really caused us to get better fast and to better communicate. So that's what schools are doing. They have to move the needle on data and build relationships with parents and families. That's what's drawing them.
Great. Mackenzie, I saw you took yourself off mute. Were you going to respond to that as well?
Yeah, happy to jump in quickly. I think it's just critical as we frame this conversation around the use of ESSER funds to also touch base on the emergency assistance to non-public schools funds and to ensure that we're supporting students, families, and teachers in all educational environments. So an example would be for our letters, Science of Reading Professional Development, leveraging unspent EANS funds to ensure that non-public educators also had access to that transformational professional learning to bring it back to our core conversation.
Thank you. And Tracy, this question's directly for you. Tracy wants to know, did I say Katie? Yes, Katie. This question is for you. Tracy wants to know more about Indiana's success with literacy and African-American students specifically.
Yeah, so I hope you picked up, we very humbly steal and learn from other states that are moving the needle. So I mentioned Mississippi. Kimyana Burke, who was their, I believe, director of literacy or something like that, has been on speed dial, I know, for Indiana and for many others, about the data and about how to best move the needle in student populations. This again touches on something that Bill hit on earlier. So our Indiana literacy cadres have shown the greatest gains, which is copying off of what Mississippi did. We put in statute that if schools had 70% or fewer than 70% of students reading, they were required to be a part of the literacy cadre. Many of those schools had student populations that maybe in the past historically weren't moving as quickly, but that putting that requirement in required them to opt in, but also opened up resources for them. And I'd say that's one of the biggest things. The other thing we've pushed in Indiana is community involvement. That has been remarkable to see. So we have a group called the Mind Trust here, right in Indianapolis, that have really focused in on literacy. I spoke at the Indianapolis City Council meeting, or just making sure elected officials, all community partners, have their hand in and are trying to move the needle, and that we're using that data to drive improvements. I know we're short on time, so I'm trying to be as concise as possible, but glad to follow up if helpful.
Thank you. So this is actually a big question, but I feel like it's a good one to ask for maybe the last, 1 minute we have. This is from Katya, and she says our public schools across the country, and you've all kind of touched on this a little bit, but are vastly underfunded and facing increasing privatization efforts. How can we talk to, so Katie, you talked about like, if you're demonstrating how well the schools are doing, that's a great, but she's asking, how can we talk to and advocate to lawmakers about the success of the different ESSER initiatives, after school tutoring, literacy, increasing the teacher pipeline, so that they are financially sustained by the states, by the people who can continue to fund them. So again, we've got 1 minute here. So anybody, go ahead.
I talk to lawmakers every single day,
Yeah.
and we always lead with data and moving the needle. That's my expectation of them, that's what they fund, and that's their expectation of me. So I'm hurrying, so I'm passing to Charlene.
I was just going to say, show it's working. When you can answer the question, is it working? Is there a return on investment? And when everybody knows that that's happening, and everyone can collectively have that conversation with policymakers, from the family to the student to the school, right to the state, that is really impactful.
Love it.
The only thing that I would add is we are in a really constrained state budget environment. And so I've really talked with my team about, if we know something works, we should use our existing resources to fund that as a way of expanding and do less of the things that are not getting the results that we need. And so I think we have to talk about the trade-offs, and evidence is what should really help guide our investments.
Can I just say quickly, that is so key. It's important that we are looking at what's currently in the system, right? We know these other funds, but what's already there, and how we blend and braid and make sure that we're actually investing those, right, in initiatives and programs that work.
Mackenzie, I know you're, go ahead.
Yeah, just the one quick thing I would add is it's also incumbent upon us to show the ROI, or that it's working to educators and families, because of course the significant importance and imperativeness of implementation with fidelity, and then also communicating to families the effectiveness of investments in programs. So thanks for letting me add that real quick.
I just want to say a huge thank you, Bill. You are so awesome. You're the best moderator. I just love these vastly different states. Like if you think about the difference between Connecticut and Colorado, my goodness. And Connecticut, and I mean, Connecticut's a little state. I grew up there, so I can talk about Anyway, thank you to all of you. We are so appreciative of your time. We know how valuable it is, and we've learned so much today, and we are so thankful.
I'm Maryland's Governor, Wes Moore. We must prioritize these comprehensive, all hands-on-deck approaches as we are doing here in Maryland with a blueprint for Maryland's future. The blueprint is laser-focused legislation to transform the state's pre-K through post-secondary systems with extensive policy changes and unprecedented investments in our state's public education system. The challenges are great, but seeing our children's eyes light up when they're able to read a book, or when adults are able to read a job application on the back of something as simple as a cereal box, those rewards are greater than any challenge. Achieving reading proficiency is going to take a special kind of commitment from us. Literacy is the best path to ensure that we leave no one behind.
Hi, I'm Utah Governor Spencer Cox. Thank you for your work to help every child achieve grade-level reading skills. Your work is crucial to the success of our children and our nation. As you know, CGLR was launched in 2010 with strong bipartisan support by those who recognize the need to focus on getting things done for children and youth instead of partisan fighting. The focus on solutions is very much the intent behind an initiative I've been working on this past year as chair of the National Governors Association, called Disagree Better. Disagree Better aims to help people work through their differences without all the hate. Over this past year, Republicans and Democrats from across the country have embraced the Disagree Better initiative, engaging in interventions that social scientists say reduce polarization. These include taping videos with a political opponent to show how we can disagree with respect, hosting debates on college campuses, and joining across party lines in hands-on service projects. CGLR's network of 350 plus community coalitions across 46 states includes leaders from both parties, showing your commitment to finding areas of shared concern. Thank you for recognizing Promise Partnership Utah with the CGLR Pacesetter Award last year for their efforts to improve early literacy outcomes, increase third grade reading scores, and expand access to all-day kindergarten. I appreciate the importance you place on finding areas of common ground to advance children's early school success. It's not just the work you do, but also the way you do it that is making a difference. Thank you.